video is to learn how to give a book talk. And I'm going to section this video into 3 parts. The first part is going to be about the author. Your job in this section is to get us excited about the author. So you might talk about the author's life, a little about the biography, and about the author's accomplished works. The second part of the book talk will be sampling the books. And this specific area is where you want to hook listeners. You want to pique their interest. So you don't really give anything away, but you can go through and choose certain parts you might want to read or tell a little bit about it without ever giving away the ending or the plot. And the third part of the book talk will be the author's website. And you'll just give a little tour of the website and tell what you like about it, because there's a lot of fun things on some author's website. Now, the sampling portion, I expect you to have at least 4 books. If you have more, that's great. I'm going to talk to you about my favorite children's book author, and so I've been accumulating his books. So I have 11 out of his 15 works, and I will share little bits about a lot of those. I don't expect the same thing. This is new to you, but I do expect you to have at least 4 books. And so I guess now I can tell you a little bit about my favorite author. You probably think you've never heard of him. His name is Chris Van Allsburg, but I can guarantee you've at least heard of some of his works. And I want to tell you a little bit about him first. He was born in 1949. When he was born in a small farmhouse. Where he lives is important because it helped him plant the seeds of some things he would write about later. So he lived there for a short time, and then he and his family moved to another area of Michigan, and he was in an area that was rural, so he was able to explore and play, and he got really in tune with what was happening in nature, and he would go out and watch what was happening in the woods. And then in 6th grade, he moved to a little bit more of an urban area. In fact, you'll see on the Polar Express, which is something I think you've probably heard of, a little house right here. And this street is representative of that 3rd move where he lived and grew up. Chris Van Allsburg is not only the writer of his books, but he's the illustrator of his books. So I'd like to get into how that happened for him. He went to school in East Grand Rapids, and his school was recognized for being a scholarly school. So because of that, people would send representatives from the University of Michigan to come to the school and recruit students. And Chris, during his years in high school, never took any art classes. He was really focused on science and mathematics. So the day came when he was to meet with the admissions counselor. And so he was sitting with the admissions counselor, and he had a list of different majors you could choose when you went to college. And he saw one. He was kind of looking over the list, from on the other side of the desk. He saw one that said A and D, and he had never heard of A and D before, so he asked the counselor about it. And the counselor said that stands for architecture and design. And that would include if you've taken art and you have an art portfolio. And he never knew that you could go to college for art. He drew on the side just for fun, but he had never formally been trained or taken any art classes. So 1967, which was this particular year, happened to be the last year that the University of Michigan would accept students without an art portfolio. So this really played into his luck for that year. And so he's talking to the counselor, and he kind of fibbed and said he was taking lessons on the side, which he really wasn't. So then the admissions counselor asked him a question, and that was, what do you think of Norman Rockwell? Norman Rockwell at that time kind of split society. So you either loved him or you hated him. And so the answer to this question was especially important. And Chris felt like he could read this counselor, and he thought that the counselor probably liked Norman Rockwell. So this is what he said. I want to read you what he stated. He said, I believe Norman Rockwell is unfairly criticized for being sentimental. I think he's a wonderful painter who captures America's longings, America's dreams, and presents American life with the drama and sensitivity of a great playwright. And the admissions counselor pounded his fist on the table and said, "Boy, you are absolutely right." And he signed his papers that day and admitted him into the A&D program at the University of Michigan. So he went in the fall of 1967. He was thrilled to find out that it didn't just mean a few art classes, that was it. I mean, he mainly got to take many art classes, and so it allowed him to really sculpt a talent, and sculpture is what he tended to focus on, and that was his major. He did bronze casting and wood carving and resin molding. He did a lot when it came to sculpture, and when he graduated, he moved on to the Rhode Island School of Design and continued. After receiving that higher degree, he did open a sculpture shop, a studio in Providence, Rhode Island, and he married Lisa Morrison, who he had met at the University of Michigan when he was there, and she was an elementary art teacher. And he opened up his first exhibit in New York City in 1977. So at this point, he's living life and making a living at being an artist while his wife is a teacher. But his wife used a lot of picture books in her classes, and she knew how well he drew. So she encouraged him to make some illustrations. And she introduced him to an editor, a book editor, and had him take in some of his work. And this book editor encouraged Chris to write his own books and to use his own illustrations. So he decided to take a moment, and not just a moment, but some time, and he wrote and illustrated his first book, which is called The Garden of Abdul Ghazazi, and we'll just touch a little bit on that later. So he's written and illustrated 15 books, and he's illustrated some books for some other people too. So one of the great things, and this is on, most of this information, if not all of it, is from his website, by the way, is that he answers questions that are given to him. So I want to go over a few of those fun questions. But I do want to say he is an award-winning author. He's won the Caldecott Honor Medal, he's won the Caldecott Medal, the Boston Globe Honor. He has been awarded the Regina Medal for Lifetime Achievement in Children's Literature. And as I go through some of his books, some of them you'll recognize and some of them you won't. But I think one of the greatest things about his books is they don't just appeal to small children. The story is rich enough that it appeals to adults as well. And even some of his picture books are meant for that more intermediate grade than the younger picture books would, like a kindergarten, first grade class. He writes a little bit above that. He does have 2 girls, by the way. So something really fun about his books, and I'm going to point this out when I go through them, is he includes a little white dog in his books. And there's a story behind his white dog, because that first book, The Garden of Abdul Ghazazi, you'll see the dog is a prominent part of the storyline. And his name is Fritz. And so if I mention Fritz, that's because Fritz is in all of his books. Even if he's not a part of the storyline, he's in there. And so he was creating this book, and he didn't have a dog, and he wanted to find a dog that was interesting that he could watch for a while before he finished his book or finished writing it. So he's a smart guy. He didn't want to have to get a dog, so he convinced his brother-in-law to get a dog. And he studied up on what kind of dog, and it ended up being a bull terrier. So that's the kind of dog he had, his brother-in-law had, and he would go visit him, and he would study him, and that dog ended up being the model for Fritz. He does talk about the fact that he did not live long, and he went to that big kennel in the sky, and so he kind of memorializes him in all of the books. He's asked, where do you get your ideas for books? And his is just, a lot of it is observation in life. He said one day he was sitting in his kitchen, and he saw some ants, just a couple of ants, and watched them as they traveled through the kitchen and the things that they were doing, and he ended up writing a book, and it's called 2 Bad Ants. And that's a really fun book, which I'll touch on as well, and I do have that book. He also has a book called A Bad Day at Riverbend. The fun thing is he had his daughter draw. If you ever read the book, A Bad Day at Riverbend, there's pictures that look like someone scribbled on them, and he had his daughter do that. So her artwork is in that book. One of the great questions is, what does it take to write and illustrate a book? So he says it takes about 7 to 9 months to write the story and make the pictures that become a book. And he said that the illustrations take much longer than writing the book itself. And he always writes the story before he draws the illustrations. Okay, I'm going to go through now, and this is the end of the first part. Now when you make the video, you'll just seam it all together. You won't do what I've done and segment it out, but for purposes of how to do this, I did chunk this out.